took away a few tips, if not more. So now we are going to give you all the opportunity to ask our presenters, Dr. Amon, Mr. Gianni, and Ms. Stewart, questions. Just please be mindful to keep your questions concise to give the presenters, opportunities to answer, and your other colleagues to ask questions as well. When asking a question, please say your name, what country you're from, what organization or media house you represent, and which presenter you would like to ask a question. So who is the first brave person to ask the question?
My name is Bob James. I am from Guyana, and my media house is HGP TV, Channel 67. Not being too familiar with this topic, but listening and looking at some of the slides, I would really like to understand the process of extracting the nodules from the ocean bed, taking it to a ship, that separation process, and then dumping the garbage back into the sea. That whole separation process, could you just summarize what happens there and if there are any chemicals involved and that gets thrown back into the sea that really contaminates the ecosystem of the seabed?
Okay, so I'll just jump in very quickly, but please others feel free to do so. So ultimately, this process has never happened before, and there's very little information on what the actual specifics of that separation process will look like, right? Because this has never happened before, and there's just not a lot of information. Mining companies are not very forthcoming. So regardless of that, what we expect to be pumped back into the ocean will be seawater, minerals, which would have been crushed up. So there'll be part mineral particles, metal particles, as well as the sediment from the seafloor. We at least know those three things will be there. And so something that we're just beginning to understand is that at different temperatures and different pressures, metals behave very differently. And this water will be a different temperature and a different chemistry from the water that's being pumped back into. Because of course on the ship, it might heat up, it might cool down, we're not sure, but it'll be likely very different to the one where it's being pumped back in. So there's a lot that we don't understand, is like basically there can be a lot of changes. So for instance, related to oxygen concentration in that water, how the minerals will behave and how toxic those potential minerals might be. Like we know from, for instance, the seafood industry that there are a lot of concerns around the contamination of seafood with metals or et cetera, with other chemicals, et cetera. And so we know that there are risks, but we don't understand how toxic these metals are going to be given the temperatures and pressures that may be at play. We also know that the sediment that will be included from the seafloor, because the mining companies will not want that, that has the potential to basically be like a dust storm. So it could essentially prevent animals from seeing, prevent whether they're bioluminescence or the actual animal themselves. It could clog their feeding apparatus, it could clog their gills, etc. So there are lots of thoughts there. And then also, just in terms of the water itself, the temperature, as I said, the temperature might be different, the oxygen might be different. And so those can almost be like, so it could be like almost like a mini heat wave if it's warmer. So there's a lot of conversation now around marine heat waves. And so if the water is hotter than the deep sea water or has a lower oxygen concentration, imagine suddenly as an animal being surrounded by an environment in which you would really struggle to live in, right? But what I want you to take away from this is there's a lot of unknowns because we just don't know much about that process. These are just things that we expect as scientists might happen as a result of what the information that's been given to us so far. But there's just really not a lot of information. Matt, Khadija, would you like to add to that?
I would only add, Diva, thanks for the explanation, that there's the issue of noise and light. And as it turns out, noise spreads or propagates much more at much greater distances in water than it does in air. And so studies have come out to say that basically the noise generated by deep sea bed mining machines and the discharge of the sediment and so forth back over the side at 600 or 1,000 or 1,200 meters depth could interrupt migratory patterns of animals that depend on echolocation to find mates, to traverse large distances, to communicate with others, members of their species. But again, unknowns. All of these are unknowns.
Thank you very much for your explanation. At least it has shed some light as to what can potentially happen. And I can say I started off being ignorant, but now I have some knowledge of what can potentially happen. Thank you.
And thank you for attending and your question.
Thanks a lot, Bob. We really appreciate it. Anyone else would like to ask a question to any of our presenters?
I would.
Just, I see. Can I just comment on the comment that just came in the chat? That's another thing that would be in that plume potentially would be the remnants of any animals that would have been destroyed and potentially collected during that process. As we said, a lot of animals live on the nodules themselves, and so they will likely be pumped up to the ship in pieces, etc., and then pumped back into the ocean. So again, changing the chemistry of the plume. So thank you for that comment. Sorry, my apologies.
Yes. Thanks a lot for clarifying, Dr. Amon. So Zoe, I hope I pronounced correctly. One should of those pronunciations should be correct.
Yes, hi. I think my internet is a little slow, but I'm gonna try anyway. So I'm Zoe Ledu. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago as well. And I am a media student currently at the College of Science, Technology and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago, or COSTAT. First of all, I have to say I've thoroughly enjoyed this session. It was very impressive and informative. My question, and this is to no one in particular, any of the panelists can shed some light, but how much of an issue do you think the deep sea mining will become in the Caribbean specifically? Because most of our countries are surrounded by ocean. So we're pretty much surrounded by it on all sides. So how relevant do you think it would be to our seas here?
Yes.
Okay, I can take a start, but I'm not from the region, so I would assume Khadija and Diva, you probably have better answers. But just in terms of physical proximity, the International Seabed Authority has also issued 3 mining licenses or exploration licenses, not exploitation, along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge between the southern boundaries of the Azores Islands, EEZ, and the equator, basically, an area called the Revanche Fracture Zone. And some of the studies that have come out on the flows of plumes that would be, which would be likely much more toxic than the nodule particles, because for reasons I won't go into, Diva can possibly explain it. It has to do with oxidation of these ore deposits that are actually buried within the ridge associated with hydrothermal vents. But anyway, that these plumes could be hugely toxic to deep sea corals and sponges and other animals on the ridges, but that they would also flow well off the ridge. And to in some cases, or at least some of the studies I've seen, predominantly to the west, i.e. toward North America and the Caribbean, if the mining was to take place there. But I think generally, just as a general answer, for people on island nations that have a much more direct relationship with the ocean, whether or not the mining would happen close by or not, if the world were to take a decision, the 167 member nations of the world will take a decision to say, back in the 1970s, we, the International Community of Nations, thought this was a really good idea and came up with what we felt was a very progressive regime for sharing the wealth that would be generated by mining the deep ocean with no harm to the marine environment. We now realize that's not the case. The assumptions that we made in the 70s are no longer hold true, that our predecessors made in the 1970s no longer hold true, and we will act and take a responsible decision to say, let's hit the pause button on this. come back in another 10 or 20 years and reconsider whether or not we should actually be doing this. And to me, that would be something like an Antarctic moment or a Montreal Protocol moment, that it is possible, and it could give us hope that it is possible to deal with a major global environmental issue in a way that countries resolve it in a responsible manner for both us and future generations. So, there's for me at least, there's that hope that we'll get a good decision out of the International Community of Nations, and that could somehow set a precedent for other cooperative and good decisions on environmental issues of global significance.
I want to add something to what Matt has said as well, which I agree with wholeheartedly. There's a couple ways in which this is really relevant to the Caribbean. One, as Matt pointed out, is that there are exploration mining contract areas just in the middle of the Atlantic, and those have the potential for impacts. Again, we're not sure, impacts to the Caribbean, etc. But more from a legal political perspective, there's a lot of relevance as well. As you've heard, these negotiations are happening in the Caribbean, right? That's where they are seated. And so there is, and not just are they happening here, but also we are negotiating on something called the common heritage of humankind or mankind. And that means that these minerals belong to all of us, right? Everyone on this call, everyone in the planet, all future generations stand to benefit or should benefit from these minerals if mining does move forward. And so that means that we should all be participating in these conversations. And as you've heard, often Caribbean nations are not present in those negotiations. It tends to just be Jamaica, Trinidad, and sometimes Guyana. And then the last point is that, there is, even though we're talking about international waters, Caribbean countries potentially may engage in mining if it ever does happen. So we know already Jamaica is one of the holders of one of these exploration licenses. And so that shows that the Caribbean is, or, at least one country is potentially thinking of engaging in this industry. But as Matt said, I think there's a real opportunity for leadership on the other side of that, which is to show that there's been no Caribbean country yet to support the call for a pause or a moratorium or to take a stand saying we need to not proceed with mining just yet. And so I think there's the opportunity for real leadership there for a Caribbean country to come forward and say, actually, this is something we need to be to think about and really make an informed decision about. So it's just, there is real room for Caribbean countries to step up. And I think that that can happen from a top-down perspective, but also from a bottom-up perspective, in that we need more of the Caribbean public aware of this issue and the fact that our countries are potentially negotiating on our behalf at the International Seabed Authority and may not necessarily be negotiating in a way that we agree with.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Gianni and Dr. Mon. So we have time for a few more questions. So will anyone else like to ask our presenters any questions? All right. Okay, anyone at all? Feel free to put your hand up or unmute. All right, so it seems that we don't have any questions. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sorry, someone said something? All right.
Sorry, I could jump in real quick. But my internet is terrible as this guy just opened back up. So hopefully it allows me to add this little quick comment. But piggybacking off what Diva said just now, I know you're talking about the physical impacts, etc. But something that a lot of people also don't take into consideration, especially when it comes to the region, as Diva mentioned, is the fact that these decisions are being made here, and then what does that mean for us, as Caribbean nationals, etc., saying that, guess what, guys, as the Caribbean, we give the green light to this industry, and, seeing all these different impacts taking place, that could also be very much negative, have a negative outlook on us as well, especially since a lot of different countries have all these amazing protocols geared towards protecting the environment. And then the one time when something is in the Caribbean and you know, a decision is being made, it's to basically cause destruction. So there's also those impacts associated with the industry as well, especially with it being housed in Jamaica right here in our waters. So yeah.
Thanks a lot for sharing that nugget of knowledge. Khadija, I see Ryan has his hand up, so he'll be our last question for the session. And before Ryan, if you don't mind, Mr. Gianni would just like to add something.
Yeah, super.
Yes, Mr. Gianni, you could unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. I thought Ryan was going to go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to
thanks, Ira. Okay. Yeah, no, just Diva, I hope you don't mind, but just to kind of add a little bit to your answer. In fact, the Dominican Republic has come out calling for a moratorium, and to the extent that Panama and Costa Rica are considered Caribbean states, they also have come out calling for a moratorium. Costa Rica, in fact, has been a real leader and pushing for a strong conservation at the International Seabed Authority. But I would also add, too, there are political consequences, I think, because the epicenter of the first mining is going to be the Central Eastern Pacific, just offshore of the Central American countries and Mexico in the Pacific. And I think there's a growing recognition on the part of some of those countries that they will suffer the consequences first if the ISA agrees to begin permitting mining. So to the extent that the Caribbean countries can recognize the potential threat and impact to their sister countries in the in Central America and stand with them to call for a moratorium, I think politically that could be beneficial to all involved.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Gianni. So Ryan would ask the last question before we wrap up the session.
Well, it's more of a comment than a question, right? So great presentations, everybody. Thanks, Khadija. I think everyone should continue to talk about this issue because I really don't see it talked about too often, right? So it is something that we should have at the fore because, I mean, as most of us are island nations, and most of us have a lot of sea space to deal with. I know that is especially the case in Trinidad. This is something that we should keep an eye on and try to get more resources to address because the ocean is a really big place, as we all know. And the more attention you give to something, the more likely you'll get to put resources to it. So this is important, right? I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Thanks a lot for the thanks a lot for the comment, Ryan. So I will, yes, so and Khadija would have made a comment there, and this is why we need you guys as journalists, no more than ever, and yes, they are here to help reporting on the issue. So on those points, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your day. I know as journalists how busy they are reporting and so forth. I'd also like to thank our incredible presenters, Dr. Mon, Mr. Gianni, and Ms. Stewart, and the Sustainable Ocean Alliance for partnering with us for this webinar. As we would have said at the beginning, myself and the Cropper Foundation CEO, Mr. Mohammed, this is just the first in many of webinars and series that we'd want to have to, help to contribute to the desensitization of Caribbean journalists and media practitioners on environmental issues. So following the session, I would like to ask everyone, I would have put my email address there. If you all have any environmental issue that you all would probably like more clarification on, or you think that it would be useful to have a webinar like this, you can feel free to send me an email and we can work on our end to make that possible and also get some incredible presenters like we have today. Additionally on that, if you would have been inspired to write any story about deep sea mining for your media houses after today's session, we will be willing to provide support for that, be it connect you with some interviews or maybe put you on to accurate resources to get information about the issue, or maybe even connect you with some of our presenters today to get more information, because as Khadija would have said and Ryan would have pointed out, it's still a area where, you know, we could do with more reporting and a little more information to become available. And last but not least, Cari-Bois Environmental News Network is a platform to help empower Caribbean journalists and citizen journalists. So if you have a story idea following today's session or again on an environmental issue, and you would need some support to make that story a reality, it could even be a video, you can reach out to us. Again, my email is there. I will type it again, and feel free to email me. Thank you so much for attending today's session on behalf once again of the Cropper Foundation, Cari-Bois Environmental News Network, and the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. We thank you for being a part of this session this afternoon, and we'll make sure all the presentations are mailed to you guys in short order. You guys and ladies and everyone in short order. So thanks a lot, and do have a great afternoon.
Thank you, and same to you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.